Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and this is episode 89, and I've been gone for a while, a few months, but I'm back, and I am here to tell you what has been percolating and percolating and percolating while I've been gone. If you think that everyone spent their work from home time dreaming up new podcasts over the pandemic, you're right. There are fresh sources for audio entertainment, investigative reporting, niche pursuits, educational podcasts, everywhere you listen. As a podcast strategist and producer, however, I have noticed one concept that has really flourished over the last 18 months: the purpose-driven podcast. Okay, well, of course, like every podcast is purpose-driven, right? There's a point to every podcast that you create, whether that be a business-related purpose, whether that be an educational purpose, whether that be just getting together with your friends and having a great time and showing everybody how funny and clever you are. I don't know. But I'm talking about a specific type of podcasting that I see rising to the top as a strategy for people, businesses, brands, creatives, entrepreneurs, and organizational leaders who want to change the status quo. I think this whole pandemic period has been about being sucked out of the status quo and forced into an isolation chamber whereby we had a lot of time to think, to feel, to numb, and then to come back with some fresh conclusions, ideas, and new boundaries, probably, for what we do and don't want to accept in our personal and professional lives anymore. And that is coming from people, that is coming from people within organizations, that is coming from people with brands, with businesses. And podcasting is the perfect place to have conversations exploring those new boundaries, those new goals, those new parameters, and expanding that conversation to include your audience, your community, your constituents, your followers. And on the flip side, with so many new podcasts in the marketplace, if you do want to effectively use your podcast as a platform for changing the status quo, you need people to listen to it. And it is more competitive than ever to get a share of your audience's ear. That is a gross phrase. I'm sorry about that. I blame Tom Webster from Edison Research. He talks about share of ear in terms of how many hours of time or how many shows on average a podcast audience member listens per week. And if you think of a really dedicated podcast listener as listening to 6 to 8 shows per week, 6 to 8 episodes, how is it that your show is going to become one of those 6 to 8? And that, my friends, is marketing. So let me back up for a second. I have been MIA from Podcast Envy and also from my other show, The Creative Imposter, for about 3 months. And the reason for that isn't because I pod faded. I know you were worried. It isn't because I don't care about these shows. It isn't because I don't have things to say and I don't have content to share with you. It is largely because I was extremely busy helping other people create content. Like I said, there was this explosion of new podcasts, new podcasters who wanted to switch it up and do things differently. Usually in the summertime, some of my clients take a hiatus. They either pause releasing new episodes or they go back into the archives and re-release old episodes so that they can have a break. Yeah, that didn't happen this summer. And so that, on top of facilitating 2 high school programs, 2 high school intensives for Power Your Story podcast, left me with very little time to organize and produce my own content. But in that period of time, I was working on creating some really awesome content for some purpose-driven organizations who wanted to, craft a show of significance. Content that means something, a show that affirms people, that makes them think, that entertains them, that gets their creative ideas flowing, that gives them resources that they need so that they can also be agents of change in their own circles. This doesn't mean that we're all activists producing social change podcasts. This happens in so many different niches. We have a podcast that we produce for the Santa Fe Opera called Destination Santa Fe Opera. It was a rebrand this year from a previous iteration of the podcast called Beyond the Opera. But Destination Santa Fe Opera was designed to help support their in-person season after having to cancel a season the summer before. This podcast was to reinvigorate their audience who was missing the experience of going to the opera, both assuring and comforting and informing the audience members who were going to return in person, and also a way to connect with those audience members who were perhaps not returning in person. Maybe they were taking advantage of some of the new programming that the opera offered, such as a drive-in experience where you could stay in your car and experience the opera. Maybe it was some of the virtual content that they were creating online, but the feeling of the show went beyond just educating about opera and supporting the season. I've been working with the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. We have a brand new podcast, and these episodes are content they could never have created before the pandemic. We're talking with artists and museum curators and anthropologists and archivists about how we as people use our work, use our resources, use our cultural institutions to examine our own identity, to understand what has happened to us, not just in the last 18 months, but throughout time, what has happened to us, and how do we reckon with what's happening culturally and in society as relates to what's happening in our personal lives and the issues and challenges that we face now. That show is called Encounter Culture. And of course, all of these shows are available wherever you're listening to this one, except not on my website. Any podcast app where you're listening to this one. I've even been working with Del Norte Credit Union to launch a show all about how credit unions are supporting their members, supporting their people throughout the pandemic, giving people options for their present and future financial well-being. I've been working with a flooring company in Western Canada. And you're thinking, well, how could a flooring company be a purpose-driven podcast? What could that possibly be about? But they're having conversations about sustainability. They're having conversations about how to support family-owned businesses and innovate throughout difficult times. And their primary mission is to support their retailers who have, in fact, been facing a lot of struggles. So they came to me and said, what can we do through a podcast to help support those retailers who are running those family-owned businesses and supporting the livelihoods of so many people in Western Canada and beyond? So these are all of the things that I've been thinking of. And when I think about working with clients or taking on new clients, there was a point in my business where I offered two basic services. I could help you launch your show, launch consulting services, and or I could edit your show for you to take the content, to make it sound nice and polished and help remove any distractions from the audio tracks, add the music, et cetera, export it out to spec, and to manage your show inside of your hosting company, make sure it posts, make sure it goes where it needs to go. All of that is great. But increasingly, I have seen my role develop more and more and more into strategy and producing, into helping clients to see the opportunities that are available to them with their show in their niche. Once we've created this incredible content, how else can that content help drive those more important, deeper missions forward? You want to grow your audience and have more listeners? Why? Who are those audience members? What are you helping them to do? What is the value proposition? What are they going to take away from this content? What do they do next? What about your audience members and the people in your community who probably are never going to listen to your long format podcast? How can you use what you're creating here in the long form for those people who want to consume it that way? And how can you provide value to those listeners who maybe just want to connect with you through LinkedIn or Instagram or through your newsletter or on your website? How can you use your podcast as a platform to create strategic partnerships and have conversations with those people that you would like to interface with, where you can partner together and work together to grow a force for change within your niche and within your industry? There's so many different ways that you can use a podcast beyond thinking of, I'm going to create the show, it's going to share information to potential customers and clients, and then my business will grow. There's so much deeper thinking beyond that. And there's a process by which we can uncover what this is for your show and for what it is that you are trying to shift and create and do in your world together. And it all starts with strategy. And actually, I'm going to shout out India Jackson and Erica Corday because I just had a coaching session with them today. That's over at Flaunt Your Fire for India Jackson and Pause on the Play with Erica Corday and India. And we were just talking about shifting copy on my website, which obviously needs to be updated. It always needs to be updated. Does anyone ever finish updating their website? Is it ever complete, or is it just this organic, ever growing, ever evolving thing? I don't know. I digress. But India said the phrase, it all starts with strategy for what I'm trying to do with clients. And that is 100% true. And beyond that, the strategy starts with your purpose, your why. It's become kind of cliche, I think, in most online business, entrepreneurial, marketing, coaching worlds, is identifying your why. What's your why? Why are you doing this? But honestly, truthfully, it does begin with your purpose. If you aren't clear as to why you are creating this podcast in the first place, it's not going to last. And ultimately, you're going to be disappointed with the results, most likely. So we start with strategy. Before we get into what kind of microphone, what hosting company, how do you set up your show, who are you going to interview, way before that, we start with strategy, and that strategy begins with what is your purpose. Beyond that, we look at values, we look at who you're serving, who your audience is, what kind of experience you want to craft for them, for your guests, for those who are going to be actively working on your show. And that is all of what is rolled into Podcast Envy service, whether that be production or strategy or launch or all of the above. And I'd like to take a moment because we haven't done our podcast angel yet in this episode. You didn't think I forgot the podcast angel, did you? Once again, since it's been a while, let me brush you up on the podcast angel. This is the segment of Podcast Envy where I share those partners, resources, products, services who A, help make your podcast the envy of everyone else, B, help support me in what I am creating and crafting and doing, whether that be financially or with an exchange of resources or promotion, and C, benefit when you make use of their products, services, events, whatever it happens to be. And so this episode's podcast angel is She Podcasts Live, which is coming up in Scottsdale, Arizona, oh so very soon in October. In fact, the exact dates for the conference are October 14 through 17, and I will be offering a session called Values-Based Podcasting, Craft a Show of Significance, and we are going to be digging into all of how you do what it is I'm talking about now. My session is currently scheduled for Saturday, October 16 from 2 o'clock to 2:40 p.m. That's whatever time zone Scottsdale is in, maybe Mountain? I'm not sure. And if you're like, no way am I traveling, Andrea, are you crazy? There is a virtual ticket option. So you can go to shepodcast.com/live. The link will be in the show notes, at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy089 and in the episode description in your app. And even if you can't attend the conference in person or online, do check out She Podcasts. They have a ton of amazing resources, a fantastic community on Facebook, and a premium Super Squad membership that is so valuable. Elsie Escobar and Jessica Kupferman. I mean, I've shouted them out many times on this show before. They're amazing. So do check out She Podcasts and She Podcasts Live. And if you are going to be there, come to my session. Whether you are a new podcaster or even podcasting forever, I guarantee you are going to get some fresh ideas on how to reinvigorate your show or how to start your show off right. Once again, the name of my session is Values-Based Podcasting, Craft a Show of Significance. It's on Saturday, October 16th at 2 o'clock p.m. in Scottsdale, Arizona at She Podcasts Live. Okay, and now back to our content. And I can't even remember what the heck I was talking about before we did the Podcast Angel segment. Oh yes, crafting a show of significance, a system, a process by which we start with strategy. And that strategy begins with your purpose. And that is why we call it purpose-driven podcasting. I really think that this is the way for you to make sure that you are making a podcast that matters, where you're not stuck in this cycle of if a podcast drops in the forest and no one is there to hear it, is there really a podcast at all? Or something like that. In any case, yes, there are more shows out there than ever before. More shows started during the pandemic and were entered into Apple Podcasts than ever have in one calendar year. And yet, I think the stat is something like 50% of those shows have already stopped producing new content. We call that in the industry pod fade, and that is not what I want for you. I want you to start your show on the right foot. Even if you're already podcasting, I want you to take a look at how you can think about the success of your show, how you can mark success, how you can know what the next step to take is. Because I'll be honest, especially when you go to a conference or you attend a virtual summit or something like that, you get so much information. You get so many ideas. People are talking about hosting. People are talking about distribution. People are talking about paywalls. People are talking about memberships, show notes, transcripts, audiograms, social media. There is so much that you can do in, on, and around your show, and all of the decisions that you make and the way that you choose what you're going to focus on is by coming back to the strategic plan that you create that starts with your purpose. And then from there, all of your next steps become more clear and you begin to see the results of the work that you're doing without getting mired down in the muck of how many listeners do I have and downloads and stats. And yes, all that stuff is cool, whatever, but that is not the reason why you are making your podcast, is it? All right, this wraps up my solo episode back in the saddle for Podcast Envy. And the next 2 episodes are going to be super, super special. I had a fantastic coaching session with co-hosts and co-producers of a forthcoming podcast in the healthcare space, Stacey Lampkin and Mike Palazza, who are right now hard at work creating their show, Healthcare Behind the Scenes. It's going to be amazing. Our coaching session was actually so much fun. And we ended up talking for like 90,000 hours. So not really 90,000, but it was a long, good, juicy, full action-packed conversation. And they walked out so energized and so inspired and so knowing what the next steps were that I want to share a good chunk of that coaching session with you to give you an insight into what this whole new and improved values-based show of significance process is inside of Podcast Envy. And so I've broken down that coaching session into 2 distinct episodes for you, and those will be coming up very shortly. And if you are like, yes, this is exactly what I need. This is what I need to do to make sure my show is awesome from the moment it launches. Or maybe you've already been podcasting and you're like, yes, this is what I need to refresh or to move in the next direction. Awesome. I am currently on a wait list for podcasters and aspiring podcasters who want to work with me in the new year of 2022. And you might be thinking that's far away, but actually, if that is when you want to launch your podcast or that is when you want to make some changes, now is when you want to begin thinking about those things. So if you want to get on my wait list in order to work with me either on launch, production, strategy consulting, or some combination of all of the above, there is a handy dandy form for you in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy089 and in the episode description in your app where you can sign up. You'll get a few questions in your inbox. You are not being subscribed to any mailing lists that are going to start sending you weekly sales emails and stuff like that. No. I don't even have time for all that. So you will get a few prompts from me in the beginning when you sign up. And then when there is space available for us to do a coaching session together, hopefully you will have already taken the next few steps to prepare you for our time together when we're ready to get started in 2022. I am so happy to be back here on Podcast Envy, helping you to craft a podcast that is the envy of everyone else. See ya at She Podcasts Live. Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.